Why does my greyhound whine? A little wine with dinner? Or when you're trying to sleep? Or following you all over the house until you want to whine too? Too much whining from your greyhound can become a problem. Greyhounds whine is a preferred form of communication as opposed to barking, but as with people, tone is everything. You want to find out what your greyhound's trying to tell you, but you don't want to tolerate any greyhound sass. Stick around to find out if you're missing out on the conversation, or if your greyhound's just giving you a hard time, and what to do about it. One of these days I'm going to tell you the story about Lily and this toy I made for her. It was a bit of an epic fail, and it's still somewhat painful to talk about, frankly, but if you subscribe to the channel and click the bell, you'll get the notification as soon as I make that video. Even if Miss Lily hasn't quite yet warmed up to it, you could find that this would be a sensational toy for your pet greyhound, Whippet, or Iggy. Often the problem is not your greyhound's whining, but other people's reactions to it. My son was raised with greyhounds his whole life, but suddenly developed the notion that all whining is bad dog behavior, because that's how it's treated at his girlfriend's house with her bulldog and mastiff. Great, now I have to listen to him whine about the dog's whining. Sometimes people are even harder to train than dogs. First, be glad your greyhound isn't driving you crazy with barking, because they can bark, and quite loudly too. More often, people complain that their greyhound's annual bark is actually not enough barking. Greyhounds tend to be fairly silent friends. But then there's that little whine. Why do they do it? Why is the dog whining for no reason? Your greyhound's usually trying to tell you something. He may emit a little whine to remind you that it's time for a regularly scheduled activity, such as his walk or his dinner. Something may be amiss, like his blanket is still in the dryer, and he's having a hard time settling down for a nap without it. Or maybe his toy is rolled under the couch and he can't get at it. So the first thing you want to do is play a little guessing game. For example, I'll ask Lily, "What's wrong? Did you lose your toy? Are you cold?" When I hit the right answer, she stops whining and wags her tail. But if I can't figure it out, I'll ask, "Do you want me to come with you?" And she'll turn around and actually lead me to the source of the problem. Sometimes what they're trying to tell you can be pretty funny. A friend gave me a beautiful handmade greyhound sweater. My macho boy greyhound Shannon, though, hated this thing. He'd stand in the middle of the kitchen floor and submit to having it put on, but then he'd keep trying to shake it off during our walks. Well, one really cold day, I let him out the back door, but he turned right around and zipped back inside past me and planted himself in the middle of my kitchen floor and emitted that little whine. He couldn't want the evil sweater, could he? Well, I slipped it onto him, not knowing what else to do. He went right back to the door and then whined to be let back out. When he got to be an elderly gentleman of a greyhound later on in his life, he would whine to wear his dapper red sweater in his bed to ward off the draft. Which reminds me, pay closer attention when your older greyhound starts whining. As your greyhound gets older, by the way, do investigate any new whining behaviors thoughtfully. He may be more comfortable with a little less time between potty breaks, or maybe he'll need a warmer spot or a softer bed than he used to. And here's a crazy trick that nobody is talking about. An arthritic greyhound hip can be greatly soothed by just 10 minutes with a well-wrapped ice bag. I know this may seem counterintuitive if your old fellow's already cold, but ice is known as the poor man's aspirin. The first time I tried it on Shannon, his arthritic hip was so relieved, his eyes actually rolled back in his head and he fell asleep. Your greyhound's whining keeps you on task. Lily whines to keep me on track. If I'm building a fire in the wood stove, for example, and I stop to look at the TV, I'll hear that little whine behind me, little mother reminding me to stay on task. If you stop to chat with a neighbor while you're walking your greyhound, he'll probably let you know when it's time to move on. The conversational whine is endearing and fun, but when does whining become a problem, and what can you do about it? Whining can go from cute to stressful anytime it wakes you up in the night, or becomes persistent and hysterical, or heaven forbid, both. The night whiner. This is usually a new greyhound trying to settle in. We had this happen the first night with our first dog, Peaches. She didn't know how to climb stairs yet, and my husband didn't know if having the dog in the bedroom would aggravate his allergies, so we thought we'd just leave her downstairs in her kennel for the night. About half an hour later, Peaches decided she was lonely, and she let out the most pitiful wailing I'd ever heard. So I went and got her bed and I set it up just outside our bedroom door while my husband carried her up the stairs. We left the door open, and luckily this was close enough. She settled right down, and that hallway became known as Peach's room. I found it invaluable to walk my greyhound right before I turn in. An empty greyhound is a relaxed greyhound. She knows she'll get a little treat right after we come in, too, so there's no late night sniffing around out there. Some owners, however, will have the dog right there in the bedroom and will still be awakened by whining. Often the first thought is to bring the dog up on the bed. Though some may disagree, I consider greyhounds on my bed a bad idea. They're pack animals, and bad things can happen when your head and your dog's are on the same level while you're sleeping. Solutions for dogs who whine at night. It may be enough just to bring the dog's bed closer to yours. An old-fashioned mechanical clock, the kind you wind up and it ticks, can be very soothing. They even make special diffusers that release a scent that dogs find relaxing. Some greyhounds, believe it or not, are actually afraid of the dark, so a nightlight can be very helpful. Your dog may have come from a kennel where they leave the radio on overnight, so try leaving one playing softly on the other side of your dog's bed where it won't disturb you. One very successful solution, although you might find it kind of mean, is to spritz the beast with a spray bottle. One owner recalled how this cured her whining greyhound after a night of scattered showers. If you don't care to do this and none of the other things are working, you could solve your problem on your end by not letting it wake you up. I know, easier said than done. But earplugs can be a wonderful thing. They're comfortable, and you may find that you sleep better than ever. You can still hear well enough through them to be aware if an emergency crops up, but they're just effective enough to make sure that you're not awakened by every little noise. How do I stop my greyhound from whining? It's important to remember that when your greyhound whines, he's trying to tell you something. Don't equate it with a kid having a temper tantrum, and definitely don't respond to it the same way. You're going to be amazed at how fulfilling your relationship with your greyhound becomes when you learn to interpret his different kinds of whines. The lonely soul, separation anxiety in greyhounds. Another problem can arise when your greyhound's whining regularly while he's home alone and you live within earshot of your neighbors. This is separation anxiety, and as I mentioned in my video, Are Greyhounds Destructive? Prevention is the best cure. Greyhounds are sensitive, social dogs who've spent their lives surrounded by company. Being alone is a new experience. You want to spend your first days with him, leaving him alone for increasing intervals of time. A doggy can be very helpful in working this out. He probably doesn't whine the entire time you're gone, so try breaking up his alone time a bit. Leave one or more Kong toys with a little peanut butter push deep inside of each to keep him busy for a while. Leave that clock ticking near his crate. Put a TV and a radio in different parts of the room on timers so they come on at different times. The change in sound might be just enough to distract your greyhound until you get home. The misunderstood. Keep this greyhound close to you. If you have a chatty greyhound, watch him carefully with other dogs. Some will take his whining as a sign of weakness and might lash out at him suddenly. The neurotic drama queen. Gentle discipline may be needed. One owner related a story of her greyhound who would whine every time they came home from a vet visit. The dog would usually lodge his complaint, she wouldn't pay him any mind, and he'd settle down in his bed after a little while. Then that little while became longer. Finally, after one checkup, he carried on for 2 full days. She finally turned to him and said in a sharp, frustrated tone, "Casey, just stop." Well, that put an end to that. Greyhounds are pretty sensitive though, so you don't want to chew them out too often, but it can be very effective as a last resort. Another woman in a similar situation had a greyhound who never listened to her. Well, her husband had to step in to do the dirty work. One stern word from him, and their drama queen retired her crown. The beggar. Bad manners. Dining can be unpleasant when a furry, whining barracuda is doing laps around the table. That's bad manners and should not be tolerated. Treat that the same as you would the neurotic drama queen. Try joining the conversation. Keep in mind, greyhounds can be regular little chatterboxes. If you think your buddy may just be trying to be sociable, whine back at him. This can be a really fun, playful way to spend time with your greyhound. So, what does your greyhound whine about? Oh, what? Oh, Miss Lily has just pointed out that when they do it, we call it whining. But when we do it, we call it sharing. Okay, Miss Lily, you win. Folks, whine to your heart's content in the comments below, and I'll see you next time on the Greyhound Home Care channel.